All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Carrie. I am City Market Assistant Outreach and Education Manager. I'm the one who's been sending you all of these emails, so nice to finally see you all. Not really, but hopefully you're all out there watching. Really excited to have you here with us tonight, and we are doing our Ukrainian dessert traditions live stream with our instructor Anna Mays. So super excited for this one. All of your tip donations are going to be going to the World Center Kitchen. Oh, I can hear the mics are glitchy. I will work on fixing that when I'm back. I'm going to let Anna go ahead and take over, and I will go and try to fix that and then get my announcements back.
Good evening. My name is Anna, and I'm one of the instructors here at City Market. It's really great to have you all with us this evening. I know it's this beautiful day here in Burlington. I know there was probably a lot of competition with being in the park or your garden. So thanks for showing up tonight. It means you're diehard bakers. So how is the sound? You're hearing us okay?
No, not yet. Okay.
Carrie's going to work on that. While she's doing that, I'll just start by background on this class. Tonight we're going to be learning about 3 desserts that come from Eastern Europe that are very popular in Ukraine. I think that, you know, this is a time when we've all been really affected by the war in Ukraine, and I think over the last 3 months.
Pause for just a second.
Yeah. Okay, we're checking the sound here.
Hopefully whatever I did just worked. Go ahead and try talking for a little bit.
Now, we've rebooted the sound, the mics.
Sorry for that, folks.
Okay, stop me if you're not hearing, and we'll do a sound check. So this evening, I thought it would be fun for us to sort of take a little bit of a cursory survey of a couple of your Ukrainian desserts. As I was saying earlier, I think we've all, been impacted by the situation in Ukraine in different ways, and it's been very much, in my thoughts the last few months. I have a background in cultural anthropology, specifically looking at food systems and culinary traditions in different parts of the world. And so for me, my way of trying to understand more about this situation was to actually go and do some research here in the States, but to go looking through a lot of cookbooks on the culinary traditions in the Ukraine region, as well as the neighboring countries. I think it's oftentimes nice to sort of look at the cultural side of any kind of a political conflict. And something that's nice about recipes and cooking is that they don't really adhere to political borders. And so these recipes are shared amongst Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, even as far as Hungary and Slovakia, Poland. So these recipes we're going to be learning about tonight, I've learned from Ukrainian chefs and cookbook authors, but are also very common throughout those regions. And if anybody has heritage from those countries, maybe you have tasted a lot of like poppy seed fillings in your desserts, or are familiar with a sweet cheese or cheesecake from this region. So I thought it would be fun to sort of lift up some of these recipes from Ukraine, as well as do a fundraiser class. So thank you to all who have donated to World Central Kitchen. They're just a wonderful nonprofit. They were founded in 2010, right after the Haiti earthquake, and went into the field immediately to provide hot meals for those who are working on the front lines, and they've been doing that ever since. I think as of last week, they have brought in about 8 million pounds of food and distributed that throughout Ukraine, and have served over 16 million meals so far. So thank you for your donations. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm wondering if anybody has ever baked a poppy seed sweet cake before, or sweet bread. You can either put a hand up in the chat or text what you've made. This is a recipe that has many different variations, and I should mention tonight we're going to be learning 3 different recipes. Most of the time we're going to spend on this sweetbread. It's a little bit complex, but I want to show you that it's something that you can totally do in a home kitchen really easily. And then as we have time at the end, we're going to look at just a very simple sweet cheesecake that's made with a farmer's cheese and can be, flavored with all kinds of different ingredients based on what you have around, as well as then some beverages, a winter punch and then a summer fruit punch as well. So I'm going to kind of mention those. But I think before we start, it's important to note the importance of bread in Ukrainian history. So wheat has been the staple grain for hundreds of years. You probably know because of this crisis that wheat production is very important to the economy in Ukraine, and it's one of the largest European producers of that staple crop. So the risk of food insecurity in terms of lack of grain production if the planting was disrupted is pretty high this coming year. Because wheat holds such an importance in this region, anything made with this grain is considered very special. So bread has a very central role in the diets, really for hundreds of years, even simple peasant breads, as well as more festive enriched breads that have historically been used for celebrations, for holidays, oftentimes. Well, I'm going to get into it, to the sort of traditions around Easter breads, but there are many specific breads for each holiday that are baked.
Someone said they've done a poppy seed bread before in the
chat.
Oh,
wonderful. Great. So yeah, we'll have to see how this recipe compares. Thanks. So I've been reading lots of sort of old recipes online as well as cookbooks, and I've been reading about all of these traditions related to wheat, the grain and breads. One of which is an Easter bread that's made called Pascha. If you speak a Romance language, you probably know Pâques or Pasqua in Italian is Easter. And oftentimes a food that's made for Easter will sort of take on the Easter name. So this bread, Pascha, used to be made in these very tall coffee cans in the countryside, maybe where bakers didn't have standard cake pans. And I was going to actually bake one for you to show you, but I told Carrie I wasn't able to find a good metal coffee can that didn't have like plastic on it to bake in the oven. But if you can imagine a sort of metal coffee can with a label ripped off, and then this big, huge, tall, cylindrical loaf. And then it's often glazed with like just a sugar and lemon glaze. And that was the Easter bread. And it was often taken in a basket to church on Easter Sunday, and nobody could eat it until after it had been blessed. And the crumbs needed to be very carefully swept up from the table. And oftentimes in the countryside, the mother or the grandmother of the household would put those crumbs onto the garden to sort of bless the garden for that year and have a good crop. So you can see that wheat and bread was never wasted. It was never something to just be thrown away. Another tradition says that anybody who can bake bread and make it rise has an ability to communicate with the spirits. And one of my favorite cookbook authors, Olia Hercules, talks about that in one of her recipes, having a friend who was able to communicate with the spirits and bake really well. So there's a long history around the traditions around bread baking. So I thought it would be fun for us to learn a yeasted bread that is sweet and also enriched, and then filled with a poppy seed filling, which is just delicious.
Someone said they love making babka, especially when it works.
Yes, that's great. And babka, thanks for bringing that up. That's absolutely like in this line and tradition of a enriched bread that's filled and can be twisted in many different ways. So what does enriched mean in terms of a bread? Let's just start there. I think you're all probably familiar with the general process of bread making, either with a sourdough natural yeast starter or with a commercial yeast starter, as we'll be using today, where you basically bloom the yeast, let the yeast kind of warm up and come back to life, and combine it with a liquid, and then basically combine that then with some flour and give it time, and then bake, and we've got a basic bread. So the enriched breads can be really exciting. They sort of make a bread even more fancy and rich. And a simple example would be just a regular pizza dough that has a little bit of olive oil added, a ciabatta that has a little more olive oil, all the way up to something like a brioche or like a panettone that's enriched not just with egg, but also fat with the butter. And so you can imagine that dough is going to be much more kind of heavy, but also like light, and it's got a very different texture than just a plain bread dough that doesn't have that fat or addition to it. So the dough we're going to make today is enriched with eggs. So it's going to be rich and a little bit fluffy. It doesn't have butter as a brioche would. And I think that's because this filling that we're going to add is very, very rich. It does have butter, not just butter, but walnuts, poppy seeds, and sugar. So we're getting our fat and richness from the filling. I should let you know, this is a recipe. Hopefully you've all received the handout. If you haven't, maybe check your email or the spam folder. But Carrie sent those out, I think, again today. And this is a recipe from the Ukrainian cookbook author Olia Hercules. And I have one of her books here just to do a quick sort of commercial for it. It's an excellent book, Mamuska. And it's actually, I think, sold out right now on Amazon, but maybe your local library has it. It's a lovely book where she talks about sort of her childhood traditions and all of the recipes she learned from her family in Ukraine, as well as some surrounding regions in Eastern Europe. She was born in Ukraine and then went to Cyprus for a while, then went to London and is now based in London and doing a lot of promotion to try to help us learn about Ukrainian recipes. She also published this lovely book, Summer Kitchens, if you want to check that out. That's a little more available at the moment. And you can find her online too. She's got a great website. So this is Olia's recipe, and I've kept it pretty much as she's written it, except for a couple little tweaks. One is that I really like the addition of a little bit of nutmeg in a babka style bread. Some of my favorite babka recipes have that. So we're going to add just a tad of nutmeg in. And so see if you like nutmeg, good. If you don't, feel free to leave that out. But I think it just adds a little bit of a sort of slightly different spin on the flavor.
Couple more comments in the chat. Someone's made Easter bread, a long process but delicious. And Inga says, I grew up with poppy seed strudel and probably something like the babka. My grandmother grew poppies and I have a poppy seed grinder because the seeds were always ground for fillings.
Oh, excellent. That would be lovely to see the grinder. Wow, I've never seen a grinder specifically for poppy seeds. That's
we
great.
do have a question, which maybe you'll get to when we start the bread, is will you teach us how to convert metric to English measurements?
Ooh,
But I
okay,
know that's
good question. Yeah.
thing.
So yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that. Generally, when I teach baking classes, I do use metric, and that's because we can just be a little bit more precise with using metric. So what I recommend is if you want to really get into baking seriously, to just get a kitchen scale. These are getting more affordable. They're like $25 to $30. Usually you can find them online, or here in Burlington at Kiss the Cook, they have them. And I've just found that recipes can be very kind of unpredictable when measured by volume. And the way to get recipes to be as precise as possible is to measure by weight using the metric system. I probably don't have time tonight to teach the conversion process, but do feel free. You can just look up, do a Google search and convert those. But yeah, if you can get your hands on a kitchen scale, I think it's actually really fun to bake by measuring things out. So apologies, that I didn't include the other measurements. But maybe it can be an opportunity to try something a little different. So one of the reasons I also like using metric is because it's really helpful if I have to scale up or down a recipe. I can do those conversions just a lot more easily than if I have to convert, like, I don't know, a 3/4 of a cup of something. So any other questions before we dive in?
Nope, nothing in the chat right now, but if people ask them, I will bring them up.
Okay, great. Yeah, feel free to shoot over questions. Stop me as I go along if I'm going too fast. I generally like to say this class is designed to give you as much knowledge as I can in these 1.5 hours, rather than being really a cook along or a bake along. So what I'd recommend, I've had to prep a lot of the ingredients ahead of time, so it might be hard to cook along. But if you want to just take detailed notes on your recipe and then, give it a try tomorrow or not too long into the week, so that while everything is fresh, that would be great. But yeah, hopefully this is all gonna fit in, because we're trying to cover a lot. So we're gonna start out by blooming our yeast. So this recipe uses not instant yeast, active dry yeast. And generally you can get your yeast in a little pack, or if you get it in a bulk section, we're gonna use about 10 grams. And that's about 10 grams here. That's a little bit more than 1 pack. If you have it by the pack, you can just use the pack. They have usually 7 or 8 grams. A little hint here in terms of yeast, you really want to get the freshest yeast possible and test your yeast ahead of time. I've had excellent success with the bulk Red Star yeast from Costco. Their yeast is just always really active. I think it's because it's for commercial kitchens. So if you bake a lot, that's a great place to get really good yeast. So I have warmed up 200 milliliters of whole milk in a pan. And this is a really sort of important part. You definitely want to get your milk warm, but you don't want it to be too hot for the yeast. I've given you the temperature measurement of 108 degrees Fahrenheit, 42 degrees Celsius. If you do have a thermopen or another thermometer, you can test it. But the way that you can test it just with your finger is to imagine, okay, our body temperature is around 98, 99. If we put it in 10 degrees warmer water than that, that's just what feels comfortable before it feels too hot. So if you put your finger in, it's still too hot, like you're getting into a bath that's going to burn a little bit, that's too hot for the yeast. It should feel just comfortable on your finger, but definitely warmer than body temperature, like 10 degrees warmer. So I've given the milk a little bit of sugar, and that's to feed the yeast. And then I sprinkled the yeast on top. I did that about 15 minutes ago. And you can see the yeast is sort of bubbling a little bit. Let me see if I can tilt this for you. Can you see? Yeah. So in Olia's recipe, she talks about how in Ukraine they call that the hat of the yeast, and it becomes sort of a frothy hat, and that's what you're looking for. So that shows us that our yeast is really active and healthy. And I'm going to then put that into my bowl. And what I would usually do is add the milk to the bowl while it's hot, and then pour the yeast on top. Just so your pan isn't too hot.
Inga says, having baked with fresh yeast and dried yeast, I think pastries baked with fresh taste even better. It's too bad it's hard to find, almost impossible.
Yeah, that's a great observation. That's a great comment. No, fresh yeast is wonderful. And it's not sold in supermarkets or stores that are, for the general public. However, if you have your favorite pizzeria in your neighborhood and know the people who work there, oftentimes pizza places will give you yeast. I've bought yeast many times from different pizzerias over the years, just because it's an easy way to get a little bit if you don't want to do a bulk order. But yes, fresh yeast is wonderful. We wanted to try to make this as accessible as possible, also with the flour type. So we're going to let that sort of sit until it's frothy. We already got a little bit of that sort of hat on top. And then in a separate bowl, we're going to whisk our eggs, 2 eggs. And this is really what makes the dough that much sort of richer. And we're going to put a teaspoon of vanilla. I think I did give you the teaspoon, which is, for those in metric, that's 6 milliliters. And we'll just do the old eyeball measurement. And then a little bit of salt. I think I call for about a teaspoon salt. And then the nutmeg. If you can, talking about fresh ingredients, if you're able to find the whole nutmeg, that is what's going to give the most fresh flavor. And you can you can find like designated nutmeg graters. Usually they look something like this, and then you can just grate it in. And I've got a bunch grated right here I'm going to use just for the time. But it really makes a difference. It's the same as things like cardamom. You want to just grind it fresh, sort of right before use. We're going to mix that all together. And now we're going to turn to our yeast. So let's say that's now been sitting in the bowl for 10 to 15 minutes. It was sitting over here. And we're going to sift in our flour. So I've already scaled out the flour. We have about 400 grams. In the recipe, we give you a bit of a range, 400 to 450 grams. And that is because all flour is different, and you want to be able to have a sticky dough, but a dough that you're still able to work with. So we may need to add a little bit more flour. And you know how recipes always say sift your flour. Nowadays, it's not as important, but if you have a sieve handy, it's a good practice to just pass it through a sieve quickly. And I'm using all-purpose flour here. This recipe works well with all-purpose. You could also use bread flour if you have bread flour. This is going to be a bread. The difference between all-purpose and bread flour is that the bread flour has a little bit of a higher gluten content. King Arthur's, which is what I'm using here, it's about, I think, 12.7 gluten-forming protein content. So that's like the protein in the wheat is what makes the gluten sort of act. And so as you go up in terms of the percentage of gluten, you're going to be able to get, or protein, you're going to be able to get more gluten development in the flour. So you can go all the way up to their flours that have like 15, 16, 17%. For this, though, all-purpose is fine as well. And that's more around, I think, 11.7 with King Arthur. Cake flour and pastry flour, those are softer flours with less protein. So we don't need to develop gluten like for a cake or those kinds of pastries. So we're then just going to very kind of roughly mix in our flour. And I always like to think at this part of all the bakers over time home bakers, commercial bakers who've done this very simple process and have turned out amazing breads.
Have you tested any of these recipes dairy-free? I know we talk a lot about plant-based baking, but.
That's a good question. You know, for the enriched breads, I haven't ever done an enriched bread that's dairy-free. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, that would be interesting to look at. Yeah.
Anna's using AP here tonight for the person asking. We're using AP here, but she said that bread flour or all-purpose will work. So whichever one you have on hand will work.
Yeah. Yeah. So once you've combined it as well as you can with a spoon, we're going to get in there with clean hands and try to pull it together. And it's interesting because what I'm feeling here is that I think I combined, actually, we were using up some flours here in the kitchen, in the teaching kitchen, and I combined some all-purpose flour, or some bread flour with the all-purpose, and it's actually, bread flour it absorbs the liquid more, and so you actually need a little bit more liquid with bread flour. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more here. So do feel free to adjust as needed. If you change your flour. So that's a good note to make. If you're using bread flour, only put in the 400 grams of flour. You definitely don't, you're probably not going to need the 450 if you're using bread flour. I'm going to add a little bit more. Here in Vermont, we're lucky to have King Arthur flour nearby, but if you live elsewhere, check out your local, your local flours. There, I think on the West Coast, if anyone's tuning in from California or Oregon, there's some really great flours out
Someone
there.
asked
local.
why you don't add the egg mixture right away.
Why we don't add it right away?
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah. Yeah, you can do that. It's, yeah, I like to, so yeah, sometimes I'll do that if it's like, if the milk is a little bit too warm, it's good to sort of cool it down first. But yeah, no, you can definitely do that. And I usually will do that at home too. If the milk is cooled. So yeah, at this point you can start to sort of smell the nutmeg.
Yeah, it smells like
Are
nutmeg
you
in this
smelling
kitchen.
it over there?
It's
Yeah.
great.
And you're aiming for, this is supposed to be like a very sticky dough, to the point where your hands are, it's not going to be like kneading bread. It's going to be more like almost working with like a brioche. And so we're going to be adding a little bit more flour as we need, if needed. Has anybody made brioche or maybe like panettone around the holidays? Because if you've done those breads, those are going to be similar. Any
We'll see
hands?
if anybody comments.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
as a reminder, everybody's watching on about a 30-second delay
Oh, okay.
from what we
Okay.
say. So
Okay.
if you're like
to
furiously
see.
typing or like, why haven't they gotten to my question yet?
Right.
You're probably 30 seconds behind us, so no worries.
Good
We
to
have
know.
King Arthur flour in stores. This is someone in California, but I often order from them directly. They have a lot of varieties for bread baking and great stuff. Yes, we're lucky to have
They
them.
do. Oh, that's
here.
great. That's great. You can order it there. Yeah. So then we're just going to flour our work surface a little bit and do a quick, just kind of a quick pulling together. And definitely keep your hands well floured. And I always like to keep a bench scraper handy, or a bench knife. If you have a plastic one, those are also nice at this stage. And we're just going to let this sort of come together. And I don't know, Carrie, if you might be able to grab a bowl a little larger than that size, just to leave room for it to rise. Thank you. And we're going to do a full knead later on in the process. So we're just going to kind of let it sit like this, sort of roughly brought together, cover it up. And I think in the recipe, it calls for about an hour of resting in a warm place around 75 degrees. Just a little tip, if your house is cold, like mine is still this time of year, if you have a dehydrator, you can usually set that really low to like 75 or 80, and that's a great little proofer. You can make a proofer at home. Otherwise, the oven with the light turned on is great too, and it's usually a little bit warmer than ambient temperature. So I'm going to set that aside for an hour.
But not really.
But not really. And
TV magic.
just going to wash my hands one moment.
Yep, I'm going to mute us while Anna's washing her hands. All right, we're back.
Okay, we're back. As I was washing my hands in Carrie's sink here, I just remembered actually I have just recently had an issue with my sink blocking from all of the flour that I washed down it. So if you're a baker at home, it's really good to have a little like net in your little sort of drain to catch all that flour. My plumber came and it was an expensive fix to go and get out all of that flour.
The dough.
Dough, yeah.
In your sink.
So
yeah, TV
okay.
magic.
Yeah, so fast forward an hour from now, this is what the dough should look like. I don't know if you can see, it's still a little bit kind of rough. It's got, you can see that the yeast has been active with all those little bubble holes. And I had to carry this here in my hot car, so it may have gotten a little overproofed, but we'll see. And
it could be a teaching moment for how do you know when your dough is overproofed.
That's true. Yeah, so what you want it to look like, and this is actually important because if you're in a place that doesn't have, that exact 75-degree temperature, you might need to leave your dough a little bit longer than an hour, maybe even up to 2 hours if it's chilly. You want it to be sort of puffy. It doesn't quite double in size, but it gets pretty close. And I didn't bring a plastic bench scraper, but we'll just use this. You can just gently bring it out onto a board. Depending on how soft it is, you may need to add a little bit more flour at this stage, but we're just going to knead it for about, a few minutes. I think Olia in her recipe talks about how kneading at this stage is what brings it into sort of this light and fluffy dough feel. And this is actually, thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is another teaching moment. You
Yes,
can put a wet
always
towel.
good to put a wet towel down. Thank you. I switched cutting boards and moved the towel. Yeah, so you can see how the dough is coming together and getting a little bit more smooth and light. At this point, if you smell it, there should be a little bit of sort of that active yeast combined with the nutmeg, which is really nice. Okay, so here, you don't need to kind of go crazy, maybe just kneading for like a few minutes, and then bring it into a ball shape, and we're gonna leave that at our station. It doesn't need to go back into that really warm area, just needs to have a little moment where it can rest. And it's gonna rest for about 15 minutes. I always like to cover dough just so that the outside doesn't get dry, it doesn't get sort of crusty. So while that's resting is a perfect time for us to prepare our filling. The filling, like I mentioned earlier, is just this wonderful sort of different type of flavor and texture than I think what we're used to in American pastries. The use of poppy seed is super common really throughout Europe. So I'm sure a lot of you have been enjoying pastries with poppy seeds. I think that's so neat that someone's grandmother grew poppies. I have poppies in my garden and I can't imagine the work to get the seeds out.
I can't imagine how many flours you need to get enough for like a loaf of bread.
I'm surprised it's not more expensive. Yeah. So in the interest of time, I went ahead and made the filling, but I'm going to walk you through the steps. So we're going to start with a thick-bottomed, really good saucepan. That's because we don't want to burn the milk. We don't want to scald it. And you're going to put in just a little bit of milk. It's about 200 milliliters. And you're going to then put in about 100 grams of poppy seeds. This is a really fun process because what happens is as the milk comes to a boil and starts to simmer, it sort of cooks the poppy seeds and the poppy seeds expand and absorb the moisture from the milk, and the milk quickly evaporates and becomes absorbed by the poppy seeds, and you end up with this big sort of black mass, and it's just like liquidy and thick and really delicious looking, and you can smell the poppy seeds. And so you want to cook that down for about 15 to 20 minutes until the milk has been fully evaporated, and that it won't take long. It is important to keep stirring. Olia in her recipe talks about how in Ukraine they say don't let the milk run away from you, meaning like come up, boil up, steam over, and get into your burner, like has happened to me many of times. So you're going to do that for about 20 minutes. I didn't want to make you wait while I did that, so I already did that. And then you're going to set that aside. I'd recommend pouring your milk and poppy seed mixture into a different container so that it cools down faster. Otherwise, if you're not trying to move quickly, you can just set that aside, let it cool down. Very important that the milk mixture cools at least to body temperature. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the sugar that then gets added in your food processor could melt. And if sugar melts in a liquid, it becomes liquid itself. And one day, talk about learning from experiments. One day I was making this bread and had an event fairly soon after I was starting to bake, needed to go quickly. And I was like, oh, well, using the liquid when it's warm will be great. It'll mean the sugar will dissolve faster and it'll all get blended up together easily. And what happened was very interesting. The sugar actually really turned completely liquid in the hot milk. And even after adding the nuts and the butter, the filling did not firm up. It just remained sort of liquidy. So a word of caution from my mistake is definitely let it cool down so that it won't melt the sugar. But then we're going to add in so a sugar that is a little bit on the kind of brown or molasses side. Olia in her recipe uses demerara sugar, and a very close equivalent to that is turbinado sugar. I think the difference is that turbinado is the first pressing of the sugar cane, so it has a little bit more of a molasses flavor. This is a little bit more mild, but either of those will work well. You could also use light brown sugar. Anything that's got a little bit of a molasses flavor will really blend nicely with the toasted walnuts and the poppy seed. So we've got the sugar that we are going to add, and then here are the nuts. I was having Carrie smell these earlier. It's amazing when you get a really good batch of nuts that are fresh, that are not rancid, and you toast them just a little bit. They are so sweet and flavorful. And these are just going to grind up beautifully with the sugar and butter and the poppy seeds. So do just make sure to toast your walnuts a little bit, maybe 10 minutes at 350 ahead of time. That will really increase the flavor of them. When I was in Georgia, which is on the other side of the Black Sea from Ukraine, I was really just amazed by how much walnut production happens in that region. It's one of the biggest regions in Europe for producing walnuts. And because of that, walnuts are very much used in both sweet and savory dishes all throughout Eastern Europe. So I've included walnut as the nut of choice here. Olia also says you can use pecans, but I was actually on a forum a few weeks ago talking with different bakers and home cooks in Ukraine, and everyone was telling me, no, you can't use pecans. We don't have pecans here. So if we want to be sort of traditional to what grows in the region, walnuts are great. They're also just really fatty, which is good. And so what I did is I actually used a food processor. I wonder how that compares to the poppy seed mill.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't get the seeds quite as ground up, but it does grind them a little bit. And so I threw in first the milk and the poppy seed mixture, ground those as best I could till it's really like smooth. And then you add in the sugar, and then you add in the nuts and a little bit of salted butter. If you don't have salted, you can just sprinkle in a little bit of salt. And then you grind that all up, and it turns into this beautiful sort of dark paste. And you see if you leave it out just at room temperature, it's the perfect consistency for spreading. You can also make this, days ahead, maybe 2 or 3 days ahead, and just keep it in an airtight container in the fridge. But do let it come back to room temperature, or with the butter, it would be too hard to spread. But this is just like so good.
I just want to eat out of this.
You just want to, eat it. A couple, variations. There are so many different ways you can fill a sweet bread or babka style bread. I think, the chocolate hazelnut combo is very popular, but also any kind of like cream or cheeses can be sweetened and put in. But I could also see this done with maybe like almost like a poppy seed marzipan paste. So using maybe almonds, and then instead of vanilla, you could use almond extract, and I bet that would be really good too. So feel free to experiment. So we've got our filling, and we'll just pretend that we've had about 15 minutes has gone by, and our dough has been resting. And we're now going to roll out the dough and fill it. And to do that, I'm going to just first prepare a sheet pan. If you have a Silapat tray, that's that's great to use a mat, a silpat mat. Otherwise, parchment paper is absolutely fine. And then it's good to sprinkle either a little bit of cornmeal or maybe semolina, something that has a little bit of a rougher texture. So the bread's gonna not stick and it can have a little bit of sort of nice texture on the bottom. So are there any questions before I start the stage?
Nope.
No, okay.
Not yet.
We're good, great. All right, so as I said earlier, there are so many different ways to shape your filled bread. And I'm going to show you this sort of rolled snail shape boule or round loaf that Olia recommends in her recipe, but don't let yourself be limited by that. Absolutely feel free. If you're someone who makes babka, feel free to, fill this and then do your babka twist. Or, you could make smaller rolls. You don't have to do it this way. I'm just going to show you this way, but then, yeah, that's really just the starting point. Feel free to experiment. So I'm just going to flour this board a little bit first. Now, generally, I like to roll from right to left. So I'm going to switch up the...
Can I get anything out of the way that you're done with?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm going to orient my board this way. And if you do have a wooden countertop that's a good height for rolling, that would be best. It's not as great to roll on stainless steel, but it does work. And let's see, rolling pin. So we're aiming to roll this out to an ultimate dimension of about 18 inches by 12 inches. You can see how sort of light and fluffy it is. I think this is going to work well. I can tell that I haven't let it rest sort of completely. If you feel like the gluten isn't fully relaxed, you might need to give it a little bit more time.
But we don't have that here.
But we're trying to fit this into 1.5 hours.
And how can you tell that, like a springing back?
Yeah, it will immediately spring back to its form. It won't let you keep it rolled out. So you see how I'm sort of fighting with it a little bit? That's because the gluten hasn't fully relaxed, but it's still going to be tasty. Sometimes what I'll do if it's really not quite ready for rolling and we need to go is sort of like you might with a pizza, you can just like let it drape over your hand and let it sort of use the weight of the dough to sort of fall a little bit. And that can just help get you started. Now, if you're going to be making a really big round wreath, as is sometimes traditionally done around Easter, you might want to change your dimensions and make this much longer and not quite 12 inches, maybe more like, I don't know, like 25 inches by 6 inches, something like that, so that you can get more of a kind of round shape. But for this, I think 12 by 18 is about what we're aiming for. I didn't bring it over, but let me show you. I have this handy little tape measure that is a magnet that sticks to my fridge, and it's my baking tape measure, and it's really helpful to just always check yourself. I think, we generally have an idea that that's 18 and that's 12, but having a tape measure can keep us honest with our measurements. But you don't really have to be that precise with this. It's more just to give you a sense.
Is there a certain thickness that you're aiming for no matter what dimensions you go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're aiming for about like an inch, like maybe half an inch to an inch.
Great.
Yeah. If you can get it to half an inch, that's great. That would be ideal. And this is really the process for any of the forms that you might want to do, whether it's a braid or a twist or a weave. We're always going to need to get it pretty flat to be able to fill it. There we go, it's coming. You can see it's starting to behave a little bit more, starting to be shaped. Okay, so what you want to do first before you start filling and rolling is to just make sure that your dough is not going to stick to your surface. So just do a quick once around with your bench knife to make sure that it's going to come up easily, because you don't want to have to do this part when it is filled. Just a heads up, the filling for this bread is very sticky, and we just sort of have to surrender ourselves to getting our hands very dirty and sticky. It's sort of a messy process. Same if you're doing a chocolate filling, it really gets everywhere. So once you've gotten it unstuck, it may sort of spring back to its original form. So you might want to just give it a little bit more of a roll. Okay, so I'm at, say, close enough to 18 by 12. All right, so then it's really just as simple as taking your filling, and we're just going to liberally spread it around.
I'm going to ask about the apples.
Oh, yes,
Yes. About the apples.
So the apples, yes, great question. So that is actually a recent addition by Olia that I think wasn't traditional for her family's recipe, but she added that, and it's really lovely to have. So you can either mix in the apples into the paste, or you can just, if you're using apples that are on the larger side, you can sort of sprinkle them on it. I find it's a little bit easier to spread first and then sprinkle the apples on, but that's because I like having sort of larger chunks of apple. I think in the recipe she calls for mincing or dicing them. I think she says just dice them. And if you are doing smaller apples, you can absolutely blend them all together. Yeah. In terms of your apples, you can really use anything. It's not, I'd say this recipe isn't one where you have to look for a certain variety. We were able to use storage apples here that I think are going to turn out really nicely. And feel free to do it without apples if there are, kids in your house who might not want chunks of fruit. So you're trying to leave a good inch all around to be able to stick the dough to itself, sort of make it adhere to itself as we roll. You'll see the filling has a tendency to sort of squish out the sides as we go. So you don't want to make it too thick or too close to the edge. I'm going to sort of stop there, even though I've got a little bit more.
These would probably be really good as like little individual buns too,
yeah.
like handheld.
Actually, yes. If I had had a little more time today, I was hoping to make a second dough to show you how to just make little little twists, sort of babka style buns. But you can absolutely do that. You would probably cut off maybe about like 60 grams of dough, and you can scale them all out on your scale so they're the same, they're uniform, and then you just like roll them out individually, put on the apples and the filling. And the only different thing is that when you roll it up, you don't cut it all the way through. You leave one end attached, and then you weave it and then sort of, turn it into a little bun. So feel free to, alter the amount of apple. I think we recommended 2 apples for this recipe, and that's about 2 apples
Someone commented, poppy seed bread is my kryptonite, so thank you for offering this demo with Anna and sharing recipes. I'm appreciating Anna's comfortable teaching approach too. So great job.
Thank you. Yeah, poppy seed is just, I feel like it's this underappreciated ingredient. And I would love for us to be able to, you know, get more pastries in shops around here in the US.
If anyone's local to City Market, we do carry it in the bulk section, and we learned that it's not in the spice jars where I thought it was. It's behind you in the actual like grains and beans area of the bulk section in a bin. So if you're looking for it and you're like, where is it? It's not where you think. And we do have it.
Yeah, they consider it more like a main ingredient, like a staple grain or seed or nut rather than like a spice. So that's
which I was like, oh, they come in tiny spice jars. It's it's spice. No?
Right. So when you get to this stage, this is where it's sort of fun because you get to roll it either as loosely or tightly as you like. I like to try to, first you want to make sure, again, to loosen everything up with your bench scraper, and then you're just going to gently sort of pull and tuck until you have kind of one clean line. And then we're just going to keep rolling. You want to sort of fold your roll over the filling rather than like push it. Otherwise, the filling will get sort of squished out to the side, and we don't want that. We're sort of gently folding it over. Being careful not to get it on our hands or else it will show on the outside. We'll reveal the secret filling. Okay. So you can see I filled it very, very full.
Oh no.
But it's okay. This is kind of a rustic, more like country bread rather than a fancy. I think we're good. Okay. I think I'll just, so this can be, you're going to see the final one is a very like kind of rustic loaf that's almost overflowing with filling, which is exciting. Then as you come to the end, you're going to pinch together the bottom and the top, and then tuck it over so the seam is facing down. That's going to help prevent it from opening up as we slice it. So once it's this size and we've gotten it all rolled up into a log, I like to just stretch it out a little bit more if you're going to be going for that kind of big round snail sort of bowl shape. And then finally just pinch the ends together as best we can. I bet you've all probably done this. It's a fun process. Okay, and then you can either take a chef's knife or a bench knife, and we're going to go all the way down and slice it this way. Now, if I was making a babka, either a loaf in a loaf pan or a bun, I would slice it all the way except for the top. I would keep that attached so that I could twist it over each other and that end would stay together. So if you can imagine doing that, then you would just twist your babka loaf or you would make your little bun. But for this, because we're doing something slightly different than a twist, we're doing this sort of snail shape. We're going to cut all the way through and make it into two separate rolls or logs. Now this is where it does get messy. So just there's no way to do this part perfectly without it spilling everywhere. But it's kind of really exciting because you get to see the inside, and then you want to have your pan ready.
Somebody just asked, could you slice that like cinnamon rolls and do cross sections of the
you
spiral?
Absolutely could do that. Yeah, and that would be a lovely kind of twist on a cinnamon bun to do it with poppy seed filling. Yeah, absolutely. And you could even use this filling with your favorite, sticky bun dough. So I generally like to use like a pizza pan, a round pan, just so that you're not limited in size by the sides. But we didn't have one here. So if you do have a round pan, I'd use that. And then you're going to start just with the first one. And we're going to start to make a little snail shape, trying to expose the poppy seed filling upwards. And this is where you can sort of play around and be creative. Like I said earlier, the result of this bread is sort of this big, huge boule loaf that is just overflowing with filling. And I really like that. If you don't want that look, you could actually make it with the seam facing inwards, and it would be more of a kind of typical bread exterior, and you would then see a little bit of the poppy filling, but not as much. So feel free to do it whatever style is best for you. Let's see, we've got a little bit coming out here. All right, so we have to do a little bit of attachment surgery for these two, for the snail. We're just gonna pinch the dough together here. And again, this is gonna, sometimes it will show, sometimes it won't, but it sort of adds to the rustic look. And then if you wanted, you could cover it up and have it be more of a surprise like that. But for this one, I'm gonna show the inside. And then I might give it just a little bit of a tug and see if we can stretch it around a little bit more. There we go. Yeah, so you see you have sort of this snail shape. And again, we're gonna just pinch it together and we'll see if that holds while it rises and bakes. So we're gonna set this aside now for about 45 minutes to an hour. And that will, again, we'll put it maybe in like a 75 to 80 degree proofer if you've got it. And that's going to just allow it to do its final rise. I like to just throw over like a big bowl, like if you have your, like a clean bowl like this, you can just put that over it, but something that will definitely give it enough room to rise. And I'm going to set it aside and wash my hands.
Do you want me to cover it with plastic wrap?
I'm actually going to fast forward and brush it soon. So, but thank you. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, it's like it's been an hour.
So I didn't make an actual TV dough for this part because I had already made 3 different doughs, but imagine that this has really risen a little bit more. You'll see it rise, even if it's not quite, it certainly won't double in size, but it will definitely expand. So yeah, just give it the 60 minutes, not like I did, and you'll see it expand more. And then our final step is to just brush it with a little bit of egg yolk and milk. You can use just egg yolk, but it's always nice to brush a sweetbread like this. It will give it a darker crust, a darker exterior, and it makes it look a little bit more sort of elegant and tasty. So as you brush, it's good to kind of go quickly and lightly, not letting it pool too much in one area. You kind of don't want like a poppy seed omelet effect. If the egg gets onto your sheet pan, you will have a little burning on the bottom. So it's nice to kind of clean up any drips or just pull them off at the end.
Inga says, the poppy seed grinder turns the seeds into a paste, very different from a nut grinder. I always like to grind my nuts instead of using a food processor. The consistency is more even and there's no chance of drawing out the oils. Could I do that with the nuts and then just stir them into the poppy seed mixture with a spoon? So rather than putting the walnuts in the food processor.
That's actually a great question. If you have a nut grinder, I would absolutely do that. Yeah, because you're basically trying to form a paste, and the food processor is sort of the quick and dirty tool that does it for everything, but using the designated mills for each of those and grinders would be great. Yeah. And if you can get like a walnut butter, or that's basically what you're going for. Yeah. So that would be delicious, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. So we've now brushed it with the final step, which was the egg and the milk. Just make sure I'm not teaching you something that's misleading here. You don't want to brush it before it's rising. Make sure to have it do its hour rest first, and then we brush it right before going into the oven. So I think for this, I think the oven temp is around 355.
355.
Yeah. So you've prepped your oven and this will go in and it will be about 60 minutes. I would check it maybe around 45 to just double check. It does brown usually very quickly. So if you don't have a convection oven, do rotate it as you go. Just keep an eye on the browning so that it's even. So I'm going to pretend I'm putting that into the oven. All right, so I made bread earlier today at home so that I could show you the final bread. So to see how much it expands, this is what it looks like after about an hour in the oven. You can see how it has that sort of really like rustic kind of all over the place look. I like that. I like how the filling is just sort of coming out everywhere. You can see that there are chunks of apple. That's why I like to leave the apple on the larger side so that you can actually tell what it is even before you cut into it or taste it. And the poppy seed sort of makes this nice just coating everywhere of yeah, sort of dark against the bread. So I'm going to be having Carrie sample this later on. Or do you want to do it? Let's say, do you want to come and slice it up now?
Yeah, you want me to
Maybe you can describe,
Well, I'm not going to eat it now because people don't want to hear me eating into a microphone. That's a really awkward sound. So we can slice it to show the interior and then I will try it after class. Absolutely.
Sure, that's a good point. This is always the part where I wish we could be in person and share all the final recipes with you. So let's just see what the interior looks like. I'm not going to lift it up or it'll fall apart, but you can sort of see here how you can see those big chunks of apple and you can, see the filling and you can tell that it was rolled, though it's sort of this different form. It's much more of a sort of, like spiral shape rather than the sort of babka twist. So that is the poppy seed roll, and I hope you get to try it at home. Any questions on that?
None that I haven't asked already. So if people are frantically typing, I'll ask them as they come in. But I think that's all the questions so far on the poppy seed roll.
Great. Okay. So moving on. Our next dessert is a really simple, compared to the yeasted bread, it's a very simple dessert. The Syrnyk, also known as paska, is a traditional sweet cheese, almost like a very simple crustless cheesecake that, from what I've read, originates in the west of Ukraine. And there's a very famous recipe from Lviv, which is like this cake, this sort of cheesecake that's then coated in chocolate. And if you have the recipe pack, you'll see the picture on the right-hand side is the Lviv cheesecake, the Lviv Syrnyk. So feel free, if you're feeling ambitious, to pour some melted chocolate over it. It's really good, especially if it's dark chocolate. But this is a sweet cheese that is very traditional around Easter time. And this cheese is made from a typical farmer's cheese called tvorog. I was asking at the Euromart here in Burlington how to pronounce it because I've only read that name, and the woman at the register said that's how she pronounces it, but she's from Romania, so it might be a little bit different in Ukraine. But it's a very popular farmer's cheese that is made really throughout that region, in Russia as well. And there are a couple different kinds. If you're here in the Burlington area, we have a European market in South Burlington, and they carry both of these types of farmer's cheese. And I would look for the type that is a little bit more dry and less kind of liquidy. It almost looks like a feta. Like this is what the woman at the store said she's seen used more typically in cheesecakes. This one is also a lovely texture, but is more kind of spreadable.
It's like cottage cheese.
Sort of more like cottage cheese. Yeah. And everybody, from what I was reading, everyone at home used to just make their own tvorog. Like it was just so simple to do with either, like an acid like vinegar or lemon, and you would just make your own cheese and then you'd strain it at home and it would be really easy to make. And then you'd just sweeten it with a little bit of sugar and vanilla and throw in some eggs and butter, and you could make a cake really easily. So if you don't make your cheese at home and can't find the farmer's cheese at a European market, a good substitute is just cottage cheese. And so I think I've included that in the recipe. And in order to get it to be a slightly drier texture, it's great if you can strain it overnight first. So just plan the day before to kind of take it out of the fridge, and you can put it in a cheesecloth. Or if it's a larger curd cheese, you could even just put it in a strainer like this over the sink and just let it drain. I did that last night, and so this is a little bit drier. And so we're going to start.
Inga asked if it's similar to German quark.
So that's a great question. From what I have learned, quark is more similar to this type of the farmer's cheese. So it's a little bit more like sort of moist and spreadable without the curds in it. But I bet you could use quark or even maybe like a combo of quark and cottage cheese.
Someone asked, what was the market? It's just called the Euro Market, right?
It's called the Euro Market, or
It's
sometimes Euro Mart online.
Right on.
And it's on, what is that? Route 2? What is that?
I'll have to Google it.
Yeah. Williston Road, maybe?
Yeah.
Carrie will put the address in the chat. It's a lovely market, and they've got all kinds of products from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, a lot of cured meats that are traditional in those countries, a lot of sauerkrauts and fermented vegetables and fruits, and some really great candies. I was recently given some of the Russian chocolates that they have there, which probably won't be available for very long because of supply issues. But yeah, it's a lovely market, family owned. So for this, we're going to first start by soaking our raisins. Many of these recipes for Syrnyk include dried fruit such as raisins or candied lemon peel. Or you could use another citrus like orange or grapefruit even. But I'm just going to use raisins, and they typically are soaked in rum overnight first. So that's what I did last night. I soaked my raisins in rum. They've sort of really plumped up. They've absorbed the alcohol. And you can also simmer your raisins in like a simple syrup if you don't want to be using rum, and just something to kind of make them a little bit more moist. And then we're going to line our pans. So for this cheesecake, as you can see in the photos here, there are many different shapes. Around Easter time, I've seen so many beautiful photos of the sweet cheese or cheesecake that's mounted into the shape of like a cross, or the sort of like the what is it called, a spire of a church. So there are many different forms that get used. They even will put some decorations relating to the church that it might be used at. They're also typically, this sweet cheese is served on the Easter table with ham. So there's sort of this combination of a like nice savory ham with a little bit of the sweet cheese. So just a very, very traditional dish, so much so that it's also called Pascha, is another one of its names. The Syrnyk, when it's made around Easter time, is known as Pascha.
A quick question for you on the poppy seed roll. They said it looks great. How does the dough compare to milk bread, like from the Chinese tradition, sweet, enriched with butter, cream, and sugar? Have you ever had Chinese milk bread, and whether it's
I have. Yeah, that's a great question, because they are similar in some ways. The milk bread, because it has the butter, I feel like is almost even like softer and more like billowy. Yeah, but a really great bread. You could try that dough, like a milk bread dough with a poppy seed filling. That could be really interesting. Yeah, no, great question. I think that this is a little bit more like a more traditional bread, because it only has the egg. It doesn't go as far as adding the butter.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cheesecake does really stick to the pan, so you're going to want to spray down your pan and then cut some parchment paper to whatever size pan you're using. I like to use these sort of mini loaf pans that are 6 inches by 3 inches because they're sort of nice as gifts. I often will like give these at Easter. I made these to give out. So it's a little nicer. It takes less time to bake. If you're using a full like 8-inch pan. Definitely give yourself a little bit longer to bake it. I actually already baked this, so I'm not going to fully prep my pans, but just wanted to walk you through the process. So Carrie has very nicely separated out the eggs for me.
One of my special
So
skills.
it's perfect. There's not a speck of yolk in the whites. That's exactly what we're looking for. So you want to carefully just separate out your eggs. If there's any fat from the yolk in the white, it's not going to whip up. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem, but not that bad for this recipe. Some recipes I've seen for Syrnyk don't even separate out the eggs. So if you're in a hurry, don't worry about it. So we're just going to whip up the whites first. And I think in your recipe, it calls for mixing together the yolks first. However, I like to do the whites if I'm going to be moving quickly and not wasting a lot of time. I'm going to do the whites first because that way I can use the same beaters and go directly to the yolks rather than having to go and wash my beaters, because you never want to use your yolked beater in the white or it won't rise.
I'm going to mute us while we're whipping, so we'll come back in a minute.
Yep. Thanks for your patience. So that's good enough. You can see those are pretty much holding firm, whipped up. And then we're going to, these are just beautiful yolks. These were good eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to now just combine everything else with the yolks. So that's about, I think it's 15 grams of sour cream, or maybe 16.
15 milliliters.
Or milliliters. Okay, great. And so that's just a little sour cream to balance out. If you're using only this dry cheese, you can see how it needs a little bit of something a little bit more moist. If you had quark, you could use that instead of the sour cream. And then we're going to add, let's see, our sugar. So 100 grams of just granulated sugar, but really any sugar is probably fine, any light sugar. A little bit of cornstarch. So I have about 16 grams of cornstarch. This serves the role of just making things kind of adhere together and stick together so it's not too liquidy. It's almost like a custard, and this is going to help thicken that up. Sometimes cornstarch can get a little bit lumpy, so we're just going to sift that in. What's nice about this recipe is that it's actually naturally gluten-free. We were talking about sort of food substitutes and allergies. It's sort of something that anybody can have who might not usually be able to have gluten. And then we're going to put in a little bit of the lemon zest, which I zested earlier. So what I really like is almost all the recipes I was kind of researching for Syrnyk, it included these two things, vanilla and the lemon zest. So it has this sort of bright citrusy flavor as well as the vanilla, which is just really nice. And I think even for those that don't like raisins, like myself usually, I know, I find that raisins in this recipe work really nicely, and I actually like them, and so I didn't want to leave those out. You could if your household doesn't like raisins, but try them. It's just a lovely combination with the rum-soaked raisins, citrus, and vanilla.
Someone commented in the New Jersey, New York area, you can find Axelrod farmer's cheese in the grocery store, and they use it for homemade blintzes. Sounds amazing.
Oh, excellent.
And then
yeah.
someone asked, is it worth sifting both the sugar and the cornstarch together?
You could do that. Yeah, if your sugar looks a little bit lumpy, definitely you could sift those together. Yeah, my cornstarch was especially lumpy today, so I thought, yeah, I should do that at least. But yeah, you can sift all your dry ingredients. Again, this is a dessert that's pretty rustic, so it's not as sort of like fine patisserie as some of the French pastries or desserts. But yeah, definitely, if you notice your dry ingredients need sifting, it's good to do. Okay, so I didn't mention earlier with the bread, but one thing I always recommend is anytime you're making something that's sweet, it's always good to add a little bit of salt, just like a pinch of salt. And if I don't think this recipe had that in it originally, but I always like to just put a little bit of salt, and that helps to bring out the sweetness. And if you do it with your fingers, you can be a little bit more mindful of how much you're putting in. Yeah, so that's just going to make it the sweet flavor pop a little bit more. And then our final step is to add our farmer's cheese. And I sometimes will just be really kind of informal with this and add a combination. Like if I don't have the full 500 grams of one cheese, or if I've got a couple different ones in the fridge I need to use up, you can just absolutely add those all in. So
someone says, not a fan of rum. Any other suggestion for soaking the raisins, like orange juice?
Yes, orange juice. You could use like grapefruit juice or any kind of juice that you like the flavor of that you think would go well.
Even just hot water just to get them soft, right?
And like I said earlier, there's like a simple syrup, which is basically just hot water and then a little sugar melted into that. Or you could just kind of rehydrate them with boiling water. That would be fine. Yeah. I mean, you could even like find some like a nice like extract, like an orange or lemon extract. You know, if you wanted to boost the flavor of the lemon, maybe just use a little hot water and lemon extract for them. Yeah, so lots of options. Feel free to play around. Yeah, see what you like. All right, so I'm gonna add most of this farmer's cheese because that was the one that was recommended to me as the most traditional. And it was not quite 500 grams in this packet. So I'm then going to add cottage cheese for the rest because I think that the moisture of the cottage cheese is going to actually help the pretty dry curds. And we're almost to 500 grams and just use a little bit of this twarog. Yeah, you can see the texture. It's really nice and kind of light and fluffy.
It's weird. It's like halfway between ricotta and cottage cheese.
Yeah.
Like it's squishy, but not wet, really.
And I think that this is made by Lifeway, which also makes kefir. They have a kefir that I think we sell at City Market. And I was just reading that it looks like they ferment it with the kefir enzymes. And yeah, so that's kind of neat. It definitely has a pretty strong flavor.
Someone says, I've made a no-bake version of this cheesecake. It's molded in a form or a bowl, weighed down to remove the liquid and refrigerated. Fattening, but oh so good. Does it have raw egg in it? You can let us know. That sounds good, but does it have egg?
Oh, that sounds great.
Cheese and sugar and...
Yeah, no, that sounds delicious.
It does sound good.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, I bet you could even just like sweeten the cheeses themselves and add a little vanilla or whatnot, even without the egg, and that would be good. So we're just going to give it a final stir. And then the last step at this stage is to add our raisins. And I also was going to mention, let's see if I brought to show you.
It's in your box, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So if you're in this area, we have a store also in South Burlington called Wine and Cheese Traders, and they import candied citrus peel from Italy, and this is some candied orange. I didn't have any of the lemon left, but if you have lemon, that would be great. That's traditional. I've read that is used in a lot of recipes.
We only have it at the holidays, and they have it year round.
Yeah, exactly. It's much more common around holidays for panettone or whatnot. So then we're just going to take a little bit of our egg whites, maybe just like a quarter or so, and kind of mix it in.
Glitchy again. I'm not sure why. Let me restart the software again. Let's see if that fixed it.
Okay, how's that sound now? So we're then just going to carefully fold in the rest of the egg white. And if you folded in egg whites to your pancakes or other recipes, you know it doesn't take long to just gently fold that in. And this will really make for a light and fluffy cheesecake.
Better. Sorry about that, folks.
Yep.
We're good.
Are we all back?
Yeah, we should be good.
Okay.
I don't know why it just keeps
Great.
glitching.
No problem. So yeah, by separating out the egg, you're going to get a much more sort of fluffy cheesecake. Otherwise, if you just mix your eggs in, you can do that, and it will be a more kind of dense, compact, like rich. Well, it's rich either way. All right.
Somebody asked if you could use your mixer if you had that kind of crumbly cheese to make it smoother. Could you just blend the heck out of it?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, you probably could. It would get a little bit smoother. I think it gets pretty much incorporated, and then I think it sort of melts. So it's okay. But yeah, you could definitely do that. And so normally I would have added the raisins before the egg whites, but we'll just kind of fold them in because I forgot about those. And Carrie likes raisins. So
I love raisins.
Got to make sure to.
And rum, so you know.
Oh, good. All right. Yeah, so once that's all mixed together, we would just then put your pans onto a sheet tray. Very important, because you want to fill this really as high as you can, because like a souffle, it's going to puff up, but then as soon as you take it out of the oven, it's going to fall. So you don't want to it's not like a cake where it's going to rise and stay up. It's going to get kind of below the line that you fill it to. So definitely fill it to as high as you can. It's going to kind of overflow a little bit, but that will mean when you take it out and it falls, you still have a pretty good height. So then you just fill those, and then you bake it, I think around 325 for maybe, I think the recipe says about half an hour or so.
40 minutes.
But that'll just vary depending on the pans that you use. You can just check it, give it kind of the wiggle test, the jiggle test, and see if it looks like it's still liquid inside. You can, check it with a toothpick. But once a toothpick comes out clean, just then put it to cool, and it's ready to go. Traditionally, it would be chilled for a couple of hours before serving. And then if you would like to coat it with chocolate, definitely chill it down first, and that will help your chocolate sort of firm up quickly as you pour it over.
So your recipe, someone asked, goes with an 8.5 by 4.5 loaf pan.
Yeah.
Is the time a lot smaller if you're doing these mini loaf pans, or is it still close to that 40 minutes?
I'd say it's about 10 minutes less if you're doing like 2 mini loaf pans. That amount of batter fills about 2 of these, maybe with a little bit left over. But yeah, I would reduce it by about 10 minutes.
Great. And someone commented on that recipe they were talking about, made with 5 egg yolks, heavy cream, etc. Would you believe Martha Stewart has a recipe, but she adds jelly beans? Hardly traditional.
Oh my goodness.
That sounds like a weird combo.
I'd like to stick to the raisins or candied lemon peel. So let me just show you. I did bake one earlier. I don't know if I'll be able to see that well, but yeah, you can see how it sort of flattens. I wanted to kind of serve this with some of the orange peel with a raisin that's showing. I just had some mint as of like this week in my garden. So you can see it's a very kind of rustic, informal, easy cake to make. It will sort of caramelize a little bit on the top because that's the bottom of the pan. So if you do have an oven where you could bake it a little higher up, that would be better. It doesn't matter if the top gets brown so much because you'll be flipping it. But generally, I coat these with chocolate, and then you don't don't see any of the caramel parts. But yeah, it's really, really delicious, very simple. And traditionally, it was often eaten with the Easter Pascha, that tall bread I mentioned earlier that has lots of eggs and butter. And it was sort of almost like a sweet cheese to spread on that. So definitely give that a try if you haven't made Syrnyk yet. And I know we're just reaching the end of the class, but I wanted to mention the final recipes, especially as we're sort of heading into the warmer season here in Vermont. If you're looking for some nice alternative beverages, in Ukraine, there is a big tradition of making fruit punch during the winter time. And this, I think historically, was a way of using up all of your sort of dried fruits from the season before, like dried apples or pears or plums, and just basically simmering them in a big pot of water, maybe along with some spices. And then you simmer them for a good amount of time until you've really extracted the flavor and the water has turned the color of the fruit. And then at the end, you add a little bit of honey. And this is called Uzvar. And from a lot of the things I was reading, it's considered sort of a national drink in Ukraine. It's that popular. So I just wanted to show you. We're not going to make it. We don't have time to make it, but I made one with the fruits that I had left over from last season from my garden and just harvesting. And I think I had just some like random currants and elderberry and gooseberries, along with some apples from here's some storage apples we were trying to use up. You can also put in citrus, a little bit of orange or lemon, and then also I think some berries, like I think I might have had strawberries and raspberries. And then you just strain everything out, add the honey to taste, and it is just delicious. It's like so refreshing. And I think it's a wonderful way to clean out our freezers if you have got frozen fruit from last year before we start getting strawberries in this year. So if you're looking for a fun beverage to try, there's also a recipe for a summer version. We're kind of on the straddling the two seasons up here in Vermont where we don't really have any fruit yet, but soon next month we're going to have strawberries, and I just wanted to sort of show you some ideas.
We just got local rhubarb, and it was like the most exciting day ever.
I literally just found this last week, and it was really great. I put some in here, and it gives a nice sour flavor. So if you've got rhubarb, growing in your yard or garden, throw some rhubarb in. It gives it just a lovely kind of very bright taste. Then star anise and cinnamon sticks are often called for in some of the winter recipes. So you feel free to experiment with those if you'd like. But you can see, I think for the summer version is called compote, kind of like a fruit compote. Yeah, Olia was sharing, because this is also a recipe that she has shared. The summer version is hers. The winter is a different cook's recipe. But if you are somebody that grows fruit, this is a great recipe to use up all of that fruit that's like just starting to go rancid. When you have like so many strawberries and you can't quite eat some of them fresh, throw them into a pot and just simmer it for an hour or so, half an hour, and then add some honey, and you'll make this lovely compote. And yeah, we can think of our friends and fellows in Ukraine who've been making these sort of fruit beverages for a long time. In the wintertime, I should add, the Uzvar is traditionally served with a little bit of, I think, brandy. So feel free to do that too. So yeah, those are just a few of the many dessert recipes that have come out of Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Definitely, I'd say look up, if you like these kinds of desserts, definitely look up Olia's cookbook, Mamuska. It's a wonderful book, and she's got lots of great recipes. Here, I can just show you. This is her photo of what she puts into the summer punch.
Yeah, someone posted earlier that it is available at the library if you're in the area. The Fletcher Free has it.
Burlington, Fletcher Free has one. I've actually emailed to ask if they could get a second copy because it's such a popular book.
Sold out everywhere. Of course they can.
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
So thank you all for coming, and just best wishes for your baking going into the summer season.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. Big thank you to Anna for doing these recipes for us tonight. If you have any other questions, Anna's email was at the bottom of that recipe handout. So you can always contact her or contact me and I will pass it on. And if you do make these recipes, we'd love to see photos. I know it's different when we can't all be here cooking together, but if you take what you've learned and cook at home, please send me pictures. I love seeing it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I should just mention, I forgot to say, I will be teaching actually another class on recipes from this region, from the Black Sea countries, along with Baker Heike Meyer up at Broke Bakery in Fairfax. And that's going to be a live stream class as well. That's going to be later this fall. So feel free to either email me and I can put you on our email list, or you can check out Broke Bakery, the website, and you'll see that class for more of these recipes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. You don't
Thank
see any other
you.
questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream, but hope you all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evenings. Good night.